let's talk about how Mount Fort's Irrigation Company's water right was established. So it was established through a process called an adjudication. And what an adjudication is it's a snapshot in time of how the water was used. And so the Division of Water Rights staff was tasked to go out and take an inventory of how the water was being used, and we called that a proposed determination. And so basically the staff determined who was using the water, where the water was being used, how they were getting the water, what the water was being used for, etc. And so they made a determination of who was using that water, and then they made a proposal, and this is a copy of that proposed determination. I have also brought a copy of that with me here. So if you wanted to look at it, you could look at it here as well. This proposed determination identifies the priority date up here. The priority date is the date that the water was first put to use. It identifies where the water is diverted from. You can see that it was diverted from the Ogden River into Mill Creek and then into the Stone Ditch. It identifies who was using the water. Well, this is the proposed determination.
It doesn't come out of the Ogden River.
Well,
This is the first one.
this is the first one, and the water does come out of the Ogden River, gets put, and some of it goes into Mill Creek, and then some of it goes into Stone Ditch. And this is how the water was used back in 1925. That was a long time ago, and there's a good chance that there's been changes. And that's kind of what what he was talking about when he was saying maybe we're not in compliance. Maybe there's been changes that the division isn't aware of. Well, we can talk about that later person to person, but we need to really cover this information. We've got a lot of information to cover. So let's talk about, so this is where in 1925, the water was diverted, and it was diverted from the Ogden River into, and it gives a diversion, and it was used to irrigate 67.5 acres of land, and it describes the 40-acre tracts of land that the water was used within, and you can see those are listed here. All of the water was used in section 20 and section 21, and we'll see what that looks like in a little bit. So then, once this was published, if there were any objections or people didn't agree with what we proposed, they could file an objection, and we worked to resolve those objections. During the time that we worked to resolve those objections, we also prepared, oh, I keep going the wrong way.
I know it's down. It's weird.
We also prepared a hydrographic survey map. Now this hydrographic survey map shows where the water was being used. Over here, over here is the golf course. You can see this is the Ogden River. This is about where Wall would have been cut in. This is 12th Street right here. And most of Mount Fort's water rights are being used in this area. This is section 20 and this is section 21 that we were looking at before. And then it took about 20 years, but then we had, the decree was published. This is the information we presented to the courts. This is the official, this is what established the water right as real property. You can see it identifies Mount Fort here. Here's the different owners. We've got the priority date over here. We've got the amount of water that they're authorized to be diverting. On another page, I also brought this book with me. This is the decree. I brought this with me if you wanted to look at that. And so these are the three documents that establish the water right as a property. So these documents are what establish the water right and what most of our records are based on. So the Division of Water Rights is the official office of record for water rights. We keep all of the information for water rights within our house. You can access the hard files if you want to by coming into our office. Our office is located on the northeast corner of Redwood Road and North Temple. You can also access the electronic files. We'll look at those later in this presentation. And you can access the electronic files from anywhere that you have the equipment and access to the internet. Now, one of the things I want to point out is the Division of Water Rights makes no claims as to the accuracy of our data. One of the reasons for that is that we're only as good as the information we've been provided. If we haven't been provided accurate and current information, we might not know about that. And we'll look and see why I say that. The other information that the division keeps is we keep all our historical records. You can access our policies, our rules, our regulations, and the water right information as well. So how is Mount Fort Irrigation Company number 2 represented on the division's website? It's represented in 4 different ways. You have a company page, you have a distribution account, you have a water right detail page, and you have a map view. And we'll look at each of these, and I'll explain this, and I put this information so you would have it on your outline. But we'll look at what those pages look like. And this is the company page. You can see the company page identifies Mount Fort. It describes the Ogden River. This is the distribution account. If you wanted to go and look at the distribution account, you could click on this point right here. It identifies the volume of water associated with this water right, 270 acre-feet of water. It identifies the land irrigated, the 67.5 acres of land. It identifies your contacts, your president, and all of your contacts for your company, and your water right number. Your water right number is 35-7007. If you had share statements or exchanges that were filed based on this water right, it would also appear here. You don't have those, so there aren't any. This is the copy of that distribution page. This is the distribution page. The distribution account is what helps pay the river commissioner to make sure that the water from the Ogden River is dumped into your ditch, and then your ditch master takes it from there. It looks like we have Janet Wigger as being the contact. It looks like there is still a balance owed on that. So I don't know if we have a bad address or if we need to update that, that you can get with me. We can get that taken care of. This is the water right detail page. This is the page you would go to if you wanted to look at this water right. As you can see, there are 70 owners. I can tell you that none of these owners have updated ownership, and the reason I can say that is because their address is Utah. Back in 1925, you could get a letter addressed to Utah and you would get it. Nowadays, we need a little more information. So the only information that's been updated is the company's information. So these are going to be the owners that you're going to be updating ownership from. We'll look at that in just a little bit. This is the rest of the water right detail page. It shows you, it's based on a decree. The quantity of water is 1.1 CFS. That's the capacity of your system. When I say capacity of your system, that's kind of like saying if I turned every faucet on in my house, the shower, the washing machine, the outdoor spigots, and I measured that water, that would be my house's capacity. However, I'm only billed for the water I use, which would be the 270 acre-feet of water that is used for the 67.5 acres of land. I hope that makes sense. Here we've got the 2 points of diversion, your priority date, 1849, that's when the water was first put to use. 67.5 acres of land. We have the 7 40-acre tracts of land where that water is being used, or where it was being used when this was filed back in 1925 and then decreed in 1948. The 67.5 acres of land, and then down here it gives you the pages where you can find the information on your water right in the decree and the proposed determination. The next page we're going to look at is the map. So if you were to click on the map, let me go back to that other page. So right here is a view map. Right here is a view map. If you wanted to look at your water use, your water master sends to the Division of Water how much water is being used. You can look at those records here. But here's the map that shows the land as it now appears. This is where that water's rediverted. These are the 40-acre tracts of land where the water for Mount Fort number 2 was used. So what does all this mean? So basically, Mount Fort Irrigation Company number 2's water right number is 35-7007, which is a decreed water right, meaning it's been evaluated by the courts and it's real property. It's not personal property like a car. It's real property. Mount Fort is a mutual association authorized to divert water from the Ogden River into Mill Creek for the irrigation of 67.5 acres of land. The mutual association administers the water according to its bylaws as agreed to by its members. So now let's talk about what the difference between a mutual association and a water company is. A mutual association is an association of owners that have adopted bylaws outlining how the property, their property, the water right, will be administered. Bylaws typically are used to establish an organization. I want that to kind of soak in. A water company leases shares that are based on the company's property, aka the company's water right. And a water company may have bylaws, but it will have policies. And policies govern how an established organization is managed. Does that make sense? So a mutual association, the easiest way to look at it is kind of like a homeowners association. They don't own any property. Their board members are probably owners of property within the association, and they administer how that property is governed. Does that make sense? So that's the difference between a mutual association and a water company. So what are some of the issues that are facing a mutual association? Well, because the mutual association is not the owner of the property, there's a number of issues that can happen. The mutual association is unable to file the necessary paperwork that it would need to be able to maintain the water right or its infrastructure. Say, for example, next week there was a huge earthquake that moved a lot of land, and you needed to put a different diversion point on the river to make sure you got your water. Your water company is not in a position to be able to file that application. At least as far as I know. I don't know what your bylaws look like. I don't know what your bylaws entitle you to do. But right now, looking at the way the water right looks, it looks like the irrigation company is like a homeowners association. And each of those 70 owners are water owners, and they own a portion of this water right. The mutual association, because they're not an owner, they don't know when somebody sells their property and transfers it to somebody else. They don't know if the property's been further developed. Say, for example, your property used to be an orchard, and now it has a house on it, and now it has a garage on it. Those are areas that aren't being irrigated. So if the mutual association, if it's written into the bylaws, they might be able to move that water onto different land to maintain the validity of the water right. In the state of Utah, we have a use it or lose it. If the water hasn't been used for 7 consecutive years, you may have lost it through forfeiture by non-use. And we'll look at some of the things that you can do to correct that. But I wanted to point out that the mutual association is unable to protect the water users from that non-use unless it's written into your bylaws. And I don't know what your bylaws are. I'm not an attorney. I'm not somebody who's competent to give you that kind of information. I can educate you on your water right. What are some of the possible solutions? Because I don't know what your bylaws talk about, I don't know what they entitle you to do. Maybe your bylaws give the water company a power of attorney, which allows them to file the applications that they need to. Maybe your bylaws give them authority to use the water within a service area. I don't know. If your bylaws don't, maybe your bylaws could be amended to give the authority that's needed to administer the water. That's totally up to you guys. You guys determine how you want to use that, how you want to administer your water, because it's your property. The other possible solution would be each of the water users could deed their interest in the water back to the water company, allowing the water company to administer the waters like a water company. So those would be the 2 possible solutions I could come up with. I'm not the smartest person on the planet. You might want to contact or hire an attorney or somebody who is more versed in the laws and could give you better advice on how to do this as a company. It's not me. I can educate you on the water right, but I don't know about corporate laws or company laws or any of that stuff. So let's talk about how water rights are transferred. So water rights are transferred, water rights are considered to be real property, just like your land. They're transferred by deed in substantially the same way your land is transferred. When you get your land deed is recorded in the county recorder's office. Your county would be the Weber County. The deeds for water need to be recorded in the county where the water is diverted and where the water is used. Your water is diverted both in Weber County and used in Weber County. So the Weber County Recorder's Office is the office where you'll find all of the deeds or the chain of title to establish you as an owner. So one thing you need to understand is that water rights are appurtenant to the land that they're used on. What that means is if I was the owner of a parcel of land and I also owned water for that parcel of land, when I deeded that land, if the only thing I mentioned was the land, the water would go with the land. Just like when you get your house deed just describes the property boundary. It doesn't describe the house, it doesn't describe the garage, it doesn't describe the oak tree. It only describes the property boundaries. Everything that's part of that property that gets that property boundary is considered to be appurtenant. The only way it's not appurtenant is if the water is reserved. The deed says no water goes, water right number is reserved, no water is being transferred with this deed. It has to reserve the water. We'll look at some examples of reports and conveyance, that's how we update ownership on the division's records, that have attempted to update ownership. So we'll look at some examples of that. So we've talked about deeds. And so the way that we update ownership on the division's records is through the filing of a report of water right conveyance. This report is kind of like a title abstract. It'll start with the owner of record, owner number 1, and it'll go through each of the owners until it gets to the owner claiming an interest. Owner number 1 to owner number 2, owner number 2 to owner number 3, all the way until it gets to, it could go all the way to owner 100, who knows? It's been a long time since ownership's been updated, so I would expect to see a fairly long chain of title in all of your cases, if that makes sense. So there's 2 ways to update ownership. One is by submitting a report of water right conveyance. The other is by recording a land or water deed addendum with a conveying deed. Most of you are not going to have that situation because to use an addendum, you need the deed going from an owner of our record, which I doubt any of you guys have a deed from one of those owners back in 1925 or 1948. Maybe you do, I don't know, but probably you don't. But if you don't, then you probably don't have an addendum. What we want to do is in the future, when you sell your property, we want you to attach an addendum. And I'll show you what those look like. The last thing is, all of you are going to need to hire a water professional. Either a Utah licensed engineer, land surveyor, title insurance agent, or an attorney. Those are the 4 professionals that can update ownership on your behalf.
I think most of us aren't gonna have the record going back to the teens, right?
Well,
How-
nobody
we're-
is. That's why I said that
the chain of
record is
title.
part of the county recorder's
Okay.
responsibilities. They're the office of record for land. So you can go to the county recorder and you can track the ownership on that parcel that you own all the way back.
Okay, so there is a way to do your history.
There is, all the way back to that owner, and we'll look at one of those examples in
Thank
the
you.
future.
Thanks, Randy.
Why should we be liable for getting public records? That's a public record, it's my
Well,
property, why should I have to do the bureaucracy of the state and pay privately for it? It's ridiculous.
Well, Utah's a big state. There's 29 counties throughout the state. Not all of the counties are online, and none of the counties, until recently when we had this addendum, have been required by law to notify the Division of Water Rights when properties changed hands.
But why should
So,
it be our personal responsibility
because it's
rather
your
than the
property.
bureaucracy?
It's your property. So it's kind of like the DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles. They have no idea when property changes hands to a new owner until the new owner brings to them the supporting documents to establish how they're the owners. So because there's 29 counties throughout the state, and we don't know when properties changed hands, we rely solely on the new owners to notify us of when they're the new owners, and then we can update ownership on their water rights.
But there is a record, when my property's bought.
I don't have a copy of that, I don't have a copy of that record. I'll show you what we have on our record,
Let's get through
and
it.
you'll see, but let's continue going. Sorry. So this is the form that you use to update ownership. This is, and you're going to be most likely hiring somebody, but it's a really good idea to have an idea of what you're expecting. This is the 100% form. If you're getting 100% of the interest on our database of that owner, then you would use the 100% form. So say I'm an owner and I own 2 acres of irrigation, and you are now updating ownership on 2 acres of irrigation, you would use the 100% form. If I have 2 acres of irrigation and I convey to you about half of that, 1 acre of irrigation, you would be using the portion form. Each of these forms are asking you to summarize each of the documents that are part of that title abstract. It's asking you for the kind of deed, the date it was signed, the date it was recorded, book page entry number, grantor, grantee, owner A, owner B to owner C. Does that make sense?
You still haven't answered my basic question.
Can we answer that question at the end? Can we answer that question at the end? Because I don't think anybody else has that question. And so we
About paying separate money to update the public record?
Yes, you are, but we can talk about that at the end. So this is the portion form. We'll look at an instance where you would use a portion form and an instance where you would use a 100% form. Several of the owners on that list we looked at had 0.1 of an acre. Many of those owners had more than 0.1. If you had a 0.1 owner that you're updating for, you might be using 100%. If the person had 2 acres of irrigation and you only have a quarter of that or a half of an acre, you would be using the portion form. So again, we talked about those addendums. Those addendums act like reports of conveyances. You would use a land deed addendum to convey water associated with a land deed, a water deed addendum for deeds that are associated with water. Once a deed is recorded with an addendum, the Division of Water Rights gets a copy of that deed, and then we will notify the grantor on that deed if we can update ownership, and we'll notify them if we cannot update ownership. So the number one reason for these forms is to create a dialogue between the seller and the buyer and to get them talking about water rights. So in the future, we would hope that you would use these forms so that ownership is talked about before it's 100 years later.
Where do we find these forms at?
These forms are on our database, and I'll show you where you can get those. We're getting there shortly. So how do you determine if you may be the owner of a water right? The first thing you're going to do is you're going to go onto our database. I'll show you how we get there. You're going to enter your address or your parcel number on the map to determine if your parcel was irrigated or was one of those parcels irrigated on that hydrographic survey map. Then you're going to determine the owner that you would be updating ownership from. I have an example. So for example, I pulled an address from one of your board members. And what I did is I entered their address onto the map. It put, oh shoot, you want to go back one? It put an X on the map. I went and then highlighted the parcel boundary. And then I added the hydrographic survey map on top of that. And if we look at this, this is approximately 0.28 of an acre, this parcel. It appears to fall within Valleso Far's 2-acre portion of Mount Fort's water right. Does that make sense? So if this was your parcel, you would need to submit a report of conveyance for a portion, because you're only getting 0.28 of his 2 acres, so you'd use the portion form. You'd start with Valleso Far, and then go from Valleso Far to Miss Far, to the Far Trust, to John Doe, Mary Doe, however it goes until it gets to you. Does that kind of make sense? And then let's look at what that parcel looks like. When we were looking at that hydrographic survey map, that entire parcel was being irrigated. Now if we look at it, approximately only 0.2 of the parcel is being irrigated because we have a house, a garage, we've got some outbuildings, we've got some driveway. And so this is an instant where I don't know if the water company has been able to protect this water from forfeiture through non-use. So let's look at some examples of some reports of conveyance that attempted to update ownership, what went wrong with them. We're also going to look at the database. I'm hoping that this works.